Greetings, guardsmen and yeomen. Today we're going to be talking about another aspect of the Trench Crusade. Much is said about the land and air conflict, the miles of trenches and artillery duels, and the trench raids that happen nightly. But how do these forces even get to those locations? New Antioch is only supplied through sea. So today we're going to be getting into the navies of Trench Crusade, the naval forces that we can see on both sides. Yes, we're going to be getting into the heretical forces on this one as well, particularly with the Sea Raiders, along with the defenses that many of the faithful nations have brought up to combat them. While the definite advantage to war on the high seas goes to the heretics, this doesn't mean that the faithful nations are out of the fight, and even places, especially in the Mediterranean, they're able to keep near parity to keep the supply convoys flowing. So let's jump into the naval conflict of the Trench Crusade and see exactly how this war is carried out, and the forces that take part in it. Beginning, of course, with the Heretical Sea Raiders. The Heretical Sea Raiders are probably the biggest threat to the faithful forces, able to appear anywhere and attack without warning and without mercy. They have destroyed coastal villages along the coasts of Albion, Ere, Finland, and Russia. They've even sent assassination missions to the Holy See itself to assassinate church leaders and temporal lords, even being credited with the killing of at least one pope. There is no shortage of volunteers for these sea raids, as thousands wish to join the high captains to earn fame and glory upon the high seas, and to get the ear of demonic lords. These raiders are based on mother ships that are reverse forms of Noah's Ark and able to hold thousands. Ruled by a sea captain, they're many kingdoms upon the waves, and from these locations they launch their raids on faithful territory, either through the use of small craft or even submarines. Developed in the 1890s by the demon lord Marbus, these submarines have harassed the shipping lanes to New Antioch and brought sea raiders and assassins upon the coasts of faithful nations. Now, the idea of sea raiding has existed within human history since the first humans put out to sea. You can go as far back as the Bronze Age collapse to find examples of these sea raiders with the sea people, known to have raided coastal villages and contributed to the collapse of Bronze Age civilizations. And we would be remiss without mentioning the Vikings, who conducted sea raids as far west as the New World, Greenland, and Iceland, and as far east as Constantinople. Viking raiding parties plundered the coasts across the entirety of mainland Europe and the island of Britain and Ireland, founding cities like Dublin, creating things like the Danelaw in England, and even raiding as far down as the Seine. And of course, former raiders formed states like the Normans, and the Kingdom of Sicily. Though the connection that we have for the Sea Raiders in Trench Crusade is much more similar to the raiding parties and actions we see taken by the navies of all sides during the World War period, with the more famous examples coming in World War II. Sea raiding was a common tactic used by both sides during the Second World War, with famous raids like the Raid of Alexandria conducted by the Italian Navy. On December 19, 1941, mini-subs of the Italian Navy broke through British submarine defenses and sank two British battleships, the HMS Valiant and the HMS Queen Elizabeth. The only saving grace for the British was that the ships sank in shallow water, allowing them to be refloated and repaired, though this took both ships out for over 9 months, greatly hampering the firepower of the Mediterranean fleet for the Royal Navy. To the Royal Navy, sea raids were a commonplace tactic in the early years of the war. Particularly, you had raids as far north as Trondheim and across the coasts of the occupied Low Countries and France. The famously failed Dieppe raid and the raid on Saint Nazaire. Also known as Operation Chariot, this was an attempt to destroy the port facilities of Saint Nazaire, one of the few locations the Germans could repair their battleships Tirpitz and Bismarck, and the majority of their submarine fleets. Conducted in March 29, 1942, over 600 commandos took part in the action, with the majority of them packed onto the outmoded ship HMS Campbelltown. The Campbelltown ran into the walls of the dry dock, and the commandos fanned out, destroying key port facilities. Though the vast majority were killed and captured, despite the loss of life, it caused massive damage to Saint Nazaire, and knocked the port out for months. The United States also conducted its fair share of raids, most notably in the Pacific, with their very own unit designed for these actions, the 1st Marine Raiders. You also have the example of probably one of the most badass ships ever put to sea within the US Navy, that of the USS Barb. The Barb was a Gato-class submarine, mostly designed to take on and harass enemy shipping, though no one decided to tell its commander, Captain Eugene Flunky, to stick to the water. Having been stationed off the coast of the home islands of Japan, he noticed that a Japanese troop and munitions train passed the same point every night, This greatly angered Fluckney, as he couldn't really do anything from the deck of the Barb, and he knew that these munitions and soldiers would go on to kill US personnel. So he and his men conducted probably one of the most daring and insane raids in US military history. On the night of July 22nd, 1945, under the command of William M. Walker, a group of volunteers armed with explosives and improvised weapons made their way ashore. There they worked throughout the night with pickaxes and shovels to plant explosives underneath the train tracks, doing their best to remain silent as a single sound would have alerted Japanese sentries, resulting in the crew's deaths. And on the morning of July 23rd, 1945, they rowed back to the Barb, and watched as the munitions train passed over the explosives. They detonated, completely derailing the train, destroying tons of Japanese munitions bound for the Japanese Navy. This raid represented the first and only time US military personnel stepped foot on the Japanese home islands during the conflict, and resulted in a Medal of Honor for Captain Fluckney, and a presidential citation for the entirety of the crew of the Barb. We can see similar tactics being used by the naval raiders. Their favorite tactic is to sneak upon their target in the cover of night, striking at dawn in the hour of the morning star, serving a dual purpose as it takes the enemies when they are most vulnerable, as well as seen as a blasphemous ritual in honor of the throne that they wish the Infernal Lords to one day erect upon Mount Xiphon. The raids typically start with a silent stealth assault. Any lookouts would have their throats ripped open by the Tartarus claws of death commandos, while silent naval legionaries emerge from beneath the waves, unleashing the sudden death with poisonous gas grenades, silenced pistols, and boarding axes. Once the alarm is raised, the bombardment by specialized sea hags, artillery witches modified for naval warfare, bombarding enemy defenses into submission. Under the cover of this assault, elite legionaries, intoxicated by the fumes of their oxygen tanks, begin their charge. Lacking armored support, the naval raiders' combat doctrine relies on speed, surprise, and savagery. Fighting is undertaken at close quarters, favoring automatic weapons, and penetrating any lines of defense and engaging their enemies in brutal melee combat, with boarding axes and short stabbing blades, before the proper defensive lines can be organized. These types of assaults rely heavily on surprise, and this is taken care of by their submarines. Created in 1866 in the utmost secrecy by heretical scientists aided by the demonic Lord Marbus, they construct the first modern submarines. These submarines would be used in a multitude of different missions, from establishing beachhead invasions in multiple European territories from Ere, Rakia, and Gibraltar, to disrupting Allied shipping to New Antioch, and bringing heretical legion raiders to the locations they want to attack. The closest comparison to these submarine assaults upon faithful shipping is that of the submarine tactics employed by the German Navy in both world wars. These submarine tactics were developed to combat the naval blockades. Naval warfare in the Great War was mostly related to convoy tactics, submarine engagements, and naval blockading of enemy ports. You didn't really see the main ship-on-ship engagements that you would expect, especially what you saw in the previous centuries. There was no ships of the line absolutely annihilating each other with cannons. In fact, there was only one major ship engagement in the entirety of the war, that being the Battle of Jutland in 1916. Directly in response to Jutland, Germany began to really invest in its U-boat program. These submarines would operate in what is known as Wolfpack tactics. Deployed in groups of 3 to 4 submarines, the Wolfpack, they would stalk Allied shipping across the Atlantic. At an opportune moment, usually in the dead of night or early morning hours, they would unleash their banks of torpedoes into the shipping convoys, causing as much damage and panic before sinking below the waves. The Wolfpack would do this for roughly several weeks, before returning either to coastal ports or to motherships operating in the Atlantic. These motherships would either be supply vessels or light cruisers of the German Navy, and where these undersea boots crews can rest and relax, rearming their U-boats to strike again. The main goal of the U-boats were to strike out at British and French shipping, sinking millions of tons of shipping throughout the war in the hopes of starving out the Entente powers. They would be responsible for killing thousands of sailors as well, including some of the first Americans to die in the conflict, even before the United States would enter the war. These were due to the result of unrestricted submarine warfare, a tactic implemented by the Germans in the early stages of the war, essentially stating that any flagged vessel approaching British or Entente power coastlines could be targeted for destruction by German submarine fleets. This included the vessels of neutral nations and civilian cargo ships. While extremely controversial, its hope was to stop neutral shipping from reaching the Entente powers and supplying them with food and ammunition, though it would go on to cause many international incidences. One of the most famous U-boat incidences has to be the sinking of the Lusitania in 1915. The Lusitania was an ocean liner operated by Cunard Lines. Ocean liners were ships taking cruise passengers, immigrants, and others across the Atlantic. And that was what the Lusitania was doing in 1915, taking cruise passengers and supplies from this port in New York into England. Honestly, not the smartest idea in an active conflict zone, but most people weren't afraid. As an internationally flagged and famous vessel, they shouldn't be targeted. Lusitania was also billed as one of the fastest ships in human history, meaning for most passengers, they felt they could simply outrun the U-boats. Though no one told this fact to the U-boats, and a German captain spotted the Lusitania off the coast of Ireland. The destruction of the Lusitania resulted in hundreds of lives being lost, including many Americans. This would actually be the closest that the United States got to war with Germany before the Zimmermann telegram. This even forced German High Command to pause unrestricted submarine warfare for 2 years, only reinstituting the practice after Russia exited the war, taking a gamble that they could starve the Allies into submission before the US would enter the war. They were wrong. But it wasn't just the U-boats raiding Allied shipping. Germany employed what was known as convoy raiders and blockade runners. These are actually converted merchant and cruise vessels, and on occasion even light cruisers from fleets that were stationed outside of Europe when the war began. For the converted merchant raiders, many of them were armed with hidden gun ports. This allowed them to still pass off as their original ships, while being able to raid British shipping lanes. Acting pretty much as pirates, their main goals were to disrupt Allied shipping and to lay sea mines around hostile coastlines. A commonly employed tactic was to hide their gun ports and enter Allied shipping convoys. From there, they would wait either till a signal or until the dead of night, reveal their guns, and begin firing at will, escaping the convoy in the confusion, or in some cases, hiding still within the convoy, as they passed off easily as just another merchant ship. Ships like the SMS Wolf went on to have full careers, sinking over 15 ships before being sunk themselves. The case for many of these convoy raiders, as they operated completely without support in far-flung territories, with operations taking place everywhere from the islands of the Eastern Pacific to the coasts of Brazil, and actually proved to be even more effective than the U-boats, with German High Command heavily prioritizing these convoy raiders rather than the new submarine designs. Though they're probably most well known for a comedic incident off the coast of Brazil with the Camp Trafalgar. The SS Cap Trafalgar was a German ocean liner on the South Atlantic run. This was taking passengers down to Brazil and Argentina. And in 1914, it was established as an auxiliary cruiser by the German military. Given hidden gun ports and designed to look like British ocean liners operating in the region, particularly one known as the HMS Carmenia. The Carmenia was also on the South Atlantic run, and they both had similar design profiles. And on September 14, 1914, the Cap Trafalgar set out to raid British shipping. Discovering a single British ocean liner, it began its chase, only to discover that this ocean liner was the HMS Carmenia. They literally ran into the ship they were trying to disguise as. Naturally, the cover was immediately blown, and the Carmenia began firing on the Trafalgar. Keep in mind that both these ships were crewed by gunboat crews and auxiliary seamen, along with their civilian crews as well, so naturally there was no tactics. Simply get as close as you can and just wail on each other. Both ships were utterly damaged, with the Trafalgar ending up sinking. There were even instances of the civilian crews grabbing plates and silverware from the galleys and just chucking it at each other as they drove past. It would become the world's first battle between former ocean liners. The Heretical Sea Legions make extensive use of sea raiders and self-pack submarine tactics to hound New Antioch shipping lanes, sinking supply ships to the embattled city. Also to sow fear behind enemy lines with their raids, and they're known extensively for their brutality. And through the established lore, we learn just how depraved these sea raiders can actually be. Competition for prestige and the honor of inflicting the greatest amount of pain and destruction on their faithful lands is fierce. To provide proof of their success and to strike fear in the hearts of their enemies, each high captain has their own unique way of declaring they are behind the raid, each more depraved than the next. Examples include the 112th Sea Legion, the Virtue Breakers, known to dismember its fallen enemies and use goetic rituals to return a necromantic semblance of life to the quivering flesh, leaving crawling and twitching arms and legs and screaming heads behind for their rescuers to discover. Meanwhile, the crew of the Submarine-class strike ship, the Disciple of Burning Water, prefers to drag their opponents overboard, and then cut them with underwater welding torches, taking great pride by killing their prey in a manner where they die both by drowning and burning simultaneously. Yeah, for anybody wanting to guess if their legions might be misled, no, they're literally the worst people in all of humanity. The objectives of the heretical raids vary. They can include slave raids, the destruction of shoreline defenses or communities, the gathering of information, looting of coastal enclaves, or even escorting death commandos on their missions to take out important church leaders or temporal rulers. What the faithful fear the most, however, are full-scale invasions from within their heartlands, like the 1872 landing that conquered Reykjavik, established a beachhead that is like a dagger pointed at the heart of the church, or events like the invasion of Ere, conducted by a heretical high captain that nearly took the island for hell. These assaults by the wolf packs of the heretical raiders have led the faithful navies to adopting convoy protection tactics. These include everything from dazzle camo to aerial reconnaissance flights, to surrounding their aid convoys with destroyers armed with depth charges. In fact, they use the same convoy protection tactics that we can see in both World War I and World War II, and actually had their origins with the Mississippi Squadron of the Union Navy during the U.S. Civil War. During the war, the Mississippi River operated as a major highway for Union forces, delivering men and material to Union forces across the battlefront, and was a major part of the U.S.'s Anaconda Plan to strangle the South. This, of course, led to plenty of attacks by Confederate raiding forces, trying to disrupt the shipping lanes. The Mississippi Squadron, or the Western Gunboat Flotilla, under the command of Lieutenant Commander Leroy Fitch, established a guidebook on convoy protection, the use of advanced recon, the herding of supply ships in between escort vessels, and the use of specialized designed escort vessels. These, in his case, were the tin-clads, upgunned paddle wheel steamers, and other bespoke ironclads. Naval warfare in Trench Crusade is often one-sided and barely known outside of the use of the submarines and the protection of the supply convoys, but there is evidence of great battles taking place, especially with the history of the Royal Fleet or the Crown of England. For decades, they were able to match and often overcome heretical naval forces, though this changed at the Battle of the Bloody Cliffs in 1805. The Battle of the Bloody Cliffs was a naval disaster for the Crown of England. Betrayed by the Prince of Wales, who switched side in the middle of the battle, the remnants of the English fleet were only salvaged thanks to Admiral Nelson's rearguard actions and the heroic sacrifice of the HMS Bellerophon. The rest of the fleet was able to limp into Portsmouth and fight another day. Though mercifully for England, so great was the toll exacted by Nelson's defiant last stand that an immediate full-scale invasion of Britain was averted. For the legendary admiral took the Great Red Dragon, the flagship of the heretical fleet, to the bottom of the ocean with him. This, of course, is the Trench Crusade variation of the Battle of Trafalgar, the grand defense by Admiral Nelson against the French Armada. Though in both cases Admiral Nelson lost his life, the British fleet came out a lot better in our timeline, completely destroying the French fleet and capturing plenty of their ships, though a storm afterwards nearly sank them all. In Trench Crusade, it destroyed almost the entirety of the British Navy, causing the years that followed to be hard for England. With the loss of their dominance of the waves, its overseas territories were gone, and even the vital trade with the mainland Europe became a desperate struggle. Heretical naval raiding parties caused widespread chaos and destruction all along the Albion coastline, striking deep into the countryside, pillaging and burning towns and cities before being intercepted by the Crown Army. In response to this, King Robert the Longsword reformed the army to counter this threat, and began plans for building of a secret weapon to safeguard the nation, putting the fate of England in the hands of Project Invincible, the construction of the moving fortress of Britannia. Completed in the year 1907, the construction of the moving fortress and its entry into the Great War finally stabilized the situation on England's shores, as it was able to match and exceed the heretical forces in any type of warfare, whether the Infernal Powers decided to attempt a landing by simply moving there under its own immense power and unleashing its devastating combined arms power upon the invasions. This ship is a megastructure. Per the lore, it's a titanic fleet carrier and battleship that can traverse both land and sea. It patrols the coast of England, leaving a thick trail of black smoke and 3 feet deep tracks in its wake. It acts as both a mobile base for England's high command, an unrivaled artillery stronghold, and the only faithful ship that can engage heretical behemoth-class vessels in one-on-one naval combat and emerge victorious. It is equally capable of engaging heretical fleets at air, sea, or on land. Within its superstructure stands the fortress monastery of the 10,000 Knights of St. George, who are capable of facing even the fiercest heretics in close quarters combat. An entire armored corps accompanies the Britannia, and a full fleet consisting of 1/3 of England's remaining naval strength acts as its escort. Above, the finest of England's air knights fly their fighter planes and naval bombers when the fortress goes to war. The heretical high captains are well aware of the strategic value of controlling the British Isles, and they are constantly striving to establish a beachhead that would lead to an eventual conquest. But this has failed so far due to the might of the fortress. The moving fortress also can travel across land, albeit slowly, and when crawling upon England's shores, a great noise and deafening hiss of steam can be heard. It appears that the ship doesn't touch the ground at all, meaning that the moving fortress is a hovercraft, which is insane considering just how big this mega project is. And this is actually the major downside of the moving fortress. Its size, and just how insane the ship is, means that it's bespoke. There's only one, as it completely exhausted the levels of orichalcum that England can produce. This means the rest of the ships can barely function, as needed replacement parts are immediately handed over to the moving fortress rather than the rest of the fleet. It also causes a lot of tension with their fellow neighbors in the British Isles, as the moving fortress only protects the Crown of England and its heartlands. Heretical raiders still continuously hound the coasts of their neighbors, particularly in the lands of Albia and Ere, which causes no shortage of internal strife, as why should the people of the Crown of England only be protected by this massive machine? Naturally, we don't have anything as big as the moving fortress to compare it to in our own timeline, though the closest comparison we do have is that of the arms race kicked off between Great Britain and Germany in the years leading up to the Great War, and the culmination of that arms race, the ship known as the HMS Dreadnought. In the years prior leading up to the Great War, we saw a massive naval buildup, particularly between the nations of Germany and Great Britain. For Germany, they were an emerging world power, and wanted to prove it. German defense planners also were greatly concerned at Great Britain and other Entente powers' ability to simply blockade the German home ports. And this led to a massive buildup of German naval fleets and the development of the undersea boots, or the famous U-boat. Great Britain, in response, began building up their fleets again, wanting to keep their hegemony of the seas that their international empire acquired. So they too began building bigger and bigger ships. This culminated in the RMS Dreadnought. The Dreadnought was the largest battleship ever produced at that point in human history. And naturally, the Germans quickly followed suit with dreadnoughts of their own, creating a whole new ship class. For the Battle of Jutland, this would be the only time the two navies ever really met in an official battle. And in the late afternoon hours of May 31st, 1916, the British Grand Fleet and the German High Seas Fleet engaged, resulting in one of the largest battles in human history and the bloodiest day in British naval history. Though the British fleet was able to force the Germans to withdraw, it came at a bloody cost. In total, Britain sustained 3 battle cruisers sunk, 3 normal cruisers sunk, and the destruction of 8 destroyers, compared to 1 battleship, 1 battle cruiser, and 4 light cruisers, and 5 torpedo craft lost by the Germans. Almost 7,000 British officers and men were killed or wounded, against just over 3,000 for Germany. In the end, both sides would claim victory as the Germans destroyed more tonnage, but Britain won the battlefield, though Germany had a better PR department and was able to convince the world that Britain suffered a major defeat. Though in all reality, it literally did nothing. Balance of power never shifted from this battle, though both sides learned a lesson from the battle, to never let this happen again. And the main fleets would end up being sequestered in their home ports for the rest of the war, with Britain going back to their convoy tactics and blockading, and Germany heavily investing in the undersea boots. Fleet-on-fleet engagements had proven way too costly for both commands. Too much men, material were lost in the battle, and they had just earned all these shiny new ships they don't want to lose them in one engagement, completely changing the type of warfare that we see across the navies of the First World War. As far as the composition and style of both the Heretical and Faithful fleets, we don't really know, outside of a few lore images and occasional name drops. We don't even know what the classes of ship they currently operate, though our best guess can probably be put at turn-of-the-century to early World War I designs, especially the dreadnought designs and destroyers of the British Royal Navy of the time. We can see this in the background of the Moving Fortresses image. We can also guess that probably ships like the USS Maine, Missouri, and the USS Sacramento would probably be common among the Faithful nations. These were older designs of the turn of the century, past the ironclads, but still not the most modern ships. And a lot of them have been known to be heavily ornate. Wood furnishings, brass fittings, and even on occasion stained glass windows around officers' quarters. The Heretical Navy is even harder to pin down, as we don't even know what they look like. Besides the description of the motherships being a reverse form of Noah's Ark, we also heard of the Behemoth and Serpent-class vessels. The Serpent-class appear to be a smaller vessel built for raiding missions, while the Behemoth is said to be a massive vessel, with only the Moving Fortress being able to take one out. And these could even be these motherships that they were discussing. One thing we do have is an image of what the Heretical Sea Raiders look like, at least they're anointed. Completely encased within a specialized diving suit, covering the iconography of the heretics, and pumping the Legionnaire full of combat stims. They also appear to be mixed in with unnatural fumes from the Lake of Fire, providing up to 66 hours of breathable gas, and bestowing a high degree of resistance to decompression sickness, otherwise known as the bends. This can allow them to be submerged for extended periods of time, gathering large infantry strike forces undetected. The diving suits of the Heretical Legions appear to be based off of your original standard diving attire, coming from about the 1940s and 50s. This was a brass or copper helmet fitted to a canvas suit to hold in the air, and a lot of times would be manually pumped in through guys on board the ship, as these diving suits are mostly used for ship repair or repair within ports and channels. We also have the standard issue weapons that we see across the Heretical Legions, with the Naval Raiders favoring the more semi-automatic and fully automatic variants for their close quarters combat. Much like New Antioch and other Faithful forces, the Heretical Legions make use of a mixture of World War I weapons from both sides of the conflict, with a few World War II weapons mixed in. Their standard issue rifle appears to be the Mosin or Gaunt. The Mosin was the standard issue rifle of the Imperial Russian Army during the First World War, and was then used by the Soviet Union after the October Revolutions. Used throughout World War II and the Cold War, we even see some instances of Mosin or Gaunts being used by Russian forces in Ukraine. For their submachine guns, Heretical forces are often seen wielding a variation of the M2 submachine gun. Better known as the grease gun for its resemblance to an industrial greasing tool, it was used as a cheaper alternative to the Thompson submachine gun used by the United States. Heavily designed off of the British Sten and Australian Owens, it would be handed out to those working behind the line's positions, artillerymen, and vehicle crews. It would actually have an extended service life, with use all the way up until the Gulf War, before being replaced by the M4 carbine. One element of weaponry the Heretical forces definitely have a leg up on the Faithful is that of automatic firearms. Assisted by the demonic Lord Marbus, the Heretical Legions were able to produce the first semi- and fully automatic rifles. We don't have any images of Heretical semi-automatics to go off of, but there were several variations tested during the Great War. Most notably, you have the Che rifle and the RNC 1917, used by France. These were mostly in testing phases, as they were prone to malfunctions and were not very effective in the mud of the trenches. Though we do have a direct real-world comparison to the Heretical automatic rifle, that being the STG-44. The STG was designed as a wonder weapon for the German Wehrmacht in 1944, and was considered one of the very first assault rifles used by a military in combat. It was provided to both Waffen-SS and Panzergrenadier forces, though it was not produced in any sort of numbers to provide any impact on the war. It also went on to inspire many of the assault rifles that we can see today, particularly the AK series of rifles, though its creator, Kalashnikov, has stated in the past that he was not inspired by the STG-44, but their design similarities are hard to ignore. In their machine gunner role, the Heretics make use of the Bren machine gun. The Bren was designed in the 1930s for the British military. It would see widespread adoption across the entirety of the Commonwealth forces, and used in multiple roles, from vehicle mounts, anti-aircraft positions, and man-portable machine guns. It would also have an extremely long service life, with variations of the weapon even seen in service up until 2006. The standard issue sidearm that we can see being used by the Heretical legions is that of the Luger P-08. The P-08 was the standard issue sidearm of the German military throughout the First World War, interwar period, and even into World War II before being replaced by the P-38. The variation that we can see being used by the Naval legions is that of the artillery Luger. Designed to give artillery crews additional firepower, it was fully automatic and came equipped with drum-fed magazines, though it proved to be extremely unwieldy and prone to jamming. And with this, we've reached the end of our discussion on naval operations within Trench Crusade. There's definitely a lot more history to lore in this video, and hopefully you don't mind that. Mostly due to the fact there isn't that much lore to naval operations within Trench Crusade itself. You have the Naval Legions, the Convoy Protection, and the Moving Fortress. Literally 2 images in total. Though naval operations are very important to the world, it's the whole reason New Antioch even survives into the modern day. So hopefully we get a little bit more about the faithful navies and the heretical forces that oppose them. Thank you all for watching to this point in the video, and if you enjoyed it, why not leave a like, and if you haven't yet, subscribe. I'm going to keep working on trying to get at least 1 video a month out for you guys, 2 if I'm lucky, and continuing my deep dives into sci-fi factions and militaries. I'll still continue my research into Trench Crusade, as World War I is one of my favorite topics, but also branch out into other worlds. We had the NCR the last time, so I'm going to be expanding for more videos in Fallout factions, Warhammer 40k, and other tabletop RPGs and other things. There's still plenty of militaries to research into. Shout out to all the subscribers I've gained so far. I'm very happy to have over 170 of you guys now, very interested in this type of content. And definitely keep an eye on this space. I'll be working to try to improve my reach over social media and other things for this channel in the coming year. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed. Have a good night, evening, wherever you're at. And I gotta get back to the archives now.